All right, we are just about an hour away, or hours since the conclusion of UFC 258, Usman versus Burns. This is the first video post-fight that we'll probably start doing a little bit more often. I'm RJ Clifford. He's Anthony Lionheart-Smith, UFC light heavyweight contender. And boy, did we pick a good time to do our very first show, Kamaru Usman versus Gilbert Burns. We talked about it on our SiriusXM show this week. There's basically nobody that questions how good Kamaru Usman is and his accomplishments, but there's people who are like, all right, maybe his fighting style isn't exactly the type that I want to enjoy. But when he wants to be in firefights, when he finds himself in firefights, he's as exciting as anyone there is. He gets the third round knockout over Gilbert Burns after coming back from what was a borderline 10-8 round for Gilbert Burns in round one.
Yeah, man, it's crazy. We look at the beginning of Kamaru Usman's, UFC career, where all of the knocks on him, his style is boring. He just wants to wrestle. Mm-hmm. And then we get a flash of greatness with the Colby Covington fight and how exciting that fight was. Mm-hmm. And then we get the Masvidal fight, which again is it's kind of that snoozer fight that everyone kind of knocks him for. And then he comes right back with Gilbert Burns. There wasn't really any real serious takedown attempts. He caught a kick and kind of rushed him over, and Burns ended up on his back. But this is the performance I wanted. And I think it answered a lot of questions that we had the previous weeks about what their real training sessions look like. Finally, Usman, kind of pulled the curtain back a little bit in his post-fight interviews and the stuff he said afterwards. He said that this is what his training sessions look like with Gilbert Burns. He countered hard, had big power, and he just had to stay focused and stay disciplined, and he thought he would get the win.
Yeah, I mean, when we there's, like you said, we've seen this Kamaru Usman before, right? He had like a fight of the year contender, basically all striking against Colby Covington. But when he had he essentially can do to Jorge Masvidal what he does to just about everybody, and he just chooses to fight the way. And you can't blame him. He's literally one of the most dominant champions in UFC history. Never has conceded a takedown. Never has even given up bottom position in the UFC. That's how dominant of a grappler he is. Do you think he was quote unquote afraid of Gilbert Burns's ground game and chose not to execute that ground game? Or was he like, okay, the striking is my best path to victory?
I think his striking was the best path to victory. And look how dangerous that was. Yeah. He when Burns was on his back, kind of playing that middle range game where Usman didn't want to go in and engage, and Burns, obviously, you could tell by the look on his face and how inviting he was to the grappling exchanges that's probably not a place Kamaru Usman wants to be. So as dangerous as Gilbert Burns is on his feet, I think that's the safest place that Kamaru Usman felt he could be. And the way that he turned that around after the first round, he was hurt really bad in that first round. And credit to Trevor Whitman, talking about, you got to get your jab going. Your jab is what's going to make you a world champion. I thought that Trevor Whitman's coaching and the way that Kamaru Usman reacted to that, I mean, he was throwing jabs from orthodox and he was switching his stance and throwing it from
dropping them with jabs.
Crazy, absolutely crazy, and it's really hard, for the people at home to turn a fight around that quickly in a matter of 5 minutes is so hard to do. I mean, he was getting pressured. He was getting pushed back. Gilbert Burns was taking the center of the cage. He was getting hit with big bombs. He was taking head kicks. And just to make that little adjustment to throw those jabs and to really sit down on him and hurt Gilbert Burns with those jabs, that's really hard to do. And that just shows what kind of champion Kamaru Usman is. It just adds another layer to his greatness. It was really inspiring to watch from a fighter's perspective.
Gilbert Burns was bordering on a 10-8 round in round one, and then Usman turns it around and got like a borderline 10-8 round in round two, and then the finish in round three. When we were talking again earlier this week on our SiriusXM show, is Gilbert Burns going to tap Kamaru Usman? He's a world champ, but he doesn't really tap a lot of guys from his back. But Burns has got power, but Usman has shown a pretty solid chin over the course of his career. That first round, I was like, oh, are we finally going to see Usman's chin crack? Are we finally going to see, some cracks in that armor? And it held up. Both chins held up until that third round when Burns got knocked out. What was the biggest thing you learned about both fighters in this fight?
Oh man, that's a great question. I learned that, sometimes as champions, you see guys kind of fall back to what they do best. John
Mhm.
Jones has been guilty of that. He's very good at laying back and really nullifying people. And you haven't seen John Jones really come out of his shell that much. He does what works, even when people get close. He doesn't want to win by a mile. He just wants to win. He doesn't care by how much. Um, I see Kamaru Usman with like that, I don't know, that drive to get better and to really continue to change himself. He's not the guy that we would typically expect to go out there and start outstriking people, or even wanting to engage in those kind of interactions with other fighters, especially guys as dangerous as Gilbert Burns.
Mhm.
I think that's a testament to who he is as a champion. He wants to continue to get better in every aspect of the game, not just what he's already good at. Um, that says to me that this guy's likely going to be a champion for a very long time, and I'm sure we'll get into it, but I don't really see anybody taking this belt off of him
Hmm.
for a long time. As far as Gilbert Burns, I think that there was some questions about how elite he really was. As he beat a Tyron Woodley, but how good of a Tyron Woodley did he beat? Did he beat a guy that maybe doesn't really want to be there, that hasn't really shown greatness in a long time?
Mhm.
So I think there were some questions on that win. Damian Maia, I think the same thing. He's an aging fighter that's not really taken out a top guy in a long time. So I think there was a lot of questions about how good Gilbert Burns really was. Take the finish and the end of the fight away, I think that he proved that he's right there. He was able to hurt him. He looked really good. He was aggressive. I think that he's just lacking some of that, I don't know, that 5-round main event title fight type of atmosphere. And I think he's going to learn from this.
I mean, we're gonna find out more as the week progresses. But what this did for the perception of Kamaru Usman is just, it's gonna be so changing for his career. Like, he went down again. Like, welterweight has traditionally been, a really big weight class for the UFC. Matt Hughes was a draw back when there were like nobody that was a draw under 205. George St. Pierre, the biggest draw in the history of the sport as far as like most pay-per-views over the course of all those pay-per-views that he headlined. And then Lawler was kind of a fan favorite. Woodley had his moments. And then Kamaru Usman kind of felt like, he's a champion. He's good. But no, this performance tonight, like, it could not have gone better. Solidified his legacy by beating the true number one contender. And he did it in just an amazing, exciting fashion. And then afterward, he just acted and carried himself. I'm here at Apex, working for the UFC, and I was in what's called the mix zone, the room where he does his post-fight interview, and just seeing in his eyes, in his mannerisms, how Kamaru Usman is just like, I am a legend. You are watching something special happening. And you hear fighters say that all the time. It never really means anything unless it's coming after a performance like that one.
Yeah, he didn't act like a guy that's defended the title 3 times. He acted almost like he had the attitude of a guy that had just gained the number one contender spot. Like it was hungry, it was angry, it was driven. And to be fair, I think I gave him some criticism this last week for sure, about not being active enough. And maybe that's where some of that hunger and drive is coming from. He doesn't get to do this that often, or for whatever reason doesn't choose to. He seemed like a guy that, even after beating a friend, former training partner, a guy he's really close to, he was angry about people not putting respect on his name. He kept saying that. I think that this fight did more for him than any of his other fights, because of the way he's handled himself afterwards. Like, he's done a better job media, as far as his media and his interviews. And I think before the fight, he did a really terrible job. So I think he kind of flipped the scales there leading up to the fight. I think because of the relationship they had, he didn't talk any trash. He didn't say anything, kind of, super respectful, really buttoned up. Afterwards, he kind of let it loose, and I think he completely did a 180 as far as how he handled the media, and I think it's going to pay dividends for him leading into his next fight.
I love, like, the championship mindset means something different for different champions, right? Like, John Jones's mindset's different than Israel Adesanya's, which is different than Stipe Miocic's. Like, everyone's got a different championship mindset. Kamaru Usman seems to have found his groove on what championship mindset is for him, because it is undoubtedly a unique championship level mindset. The way, how he passed up George St. Pierre for most consecutive welterweight wins in the UFC. And every time he was brought up like another stat or another threshold that he beat, he's like, I don't think about that. Like, he's like, yeah, Rashad Evans told me a long time ago, it's like, you'll have plenty of time to look back at like your legacy and your stats and all the records you broke. Like, none of that means squat unless I beat the guy that's next. And it's not just like rhetoric from him. Like, he is living and breathing that.
Yeah, he believes it. And the most confusing thing to me this entire time since the fight ended and we got on here, who the hell is not putting respect on his name? And again, we've gone back and forth about this. He feels so disrespected, and like people aren't taking him serious, and they don't think he's as good as he is. I don't hear anybody saying that. The only criticism I've heard, and personally given on Kamaru Usman, is I don't think he puts his foot on the gas enough. Mm-hmm. I think that there's a lot of fights he could have finished and chose not to. I think there's a lot of fights he could have been more dominant and decided to stay safe. Is that really a knock? At the end of the day, like I'm saying, I know you're way better than you're showing, but you're still winning fights. And so you know what? Let him do it, because apparently it's motivating him. It's driving him. It's feeding whatever fire he has going on deep down inside. I just don't see the same things he sees. I haven't seen anybody say he's not good, he's not dominant, that he may be the best welterweight champion we've ever had. And the only thing that's going to prove that is just continuing to knock out these title defenses. And I don't see those slowing down anytime soon.
What was the big adjustment in your mind that he made from round number 1, where he was getting clocked, to round number 2 when he took over?
Well, he didn't let Gilbert Burns just take the center of the octagon. Right when the fight started, Gilbert came out and took it, and Usman didn't really give him too much resistance. Mm-hmm. As the fight continued, he started to try to take it. He wasn't able to do it until the second round, but at least at the end of the first, going into the second, he was attempting to take it back. He was giving resistance there. And, like Trevor Whitman called for, he just started throwing the jab. And you get a guy that throws big, wild, wide punches like Gilbert does. If you just try to pull back and try to slip those or try to pull out of the way, a lot of times they're going to hit you anyway. So when they're coming round, you slip, you're going to slip into it. You pull back, you're going to pull back into it. The best line of defense is to stick that nasty jab right in his face. And if you go back and you look at the replay, as Gilbert's throwing those big looping punches is when Usman is sticking him with that jab. And even deeper, if you go down and look at his footwork, as Gilbert's pulling his foot forward to step into the big overhand, is when he's getting hit with that jab. So he's almost on one foot and squared up when he's getting those jabs landed on his face. Mm-hmm. That's when I seen him start to have problems. He was getting squared up. He was getting hit in the middle of throwing a big overhand. At the end of the day, the fastest point from A to B is a straight line. So if they throw at the same time and Gilbert's are wide and looping and Kamaru Usman's are straight, Usman's going to land those first every time.
So in Kamaru Usman's entire UFC career, he's been a wrestling heavy, grind you out, 30-27 dominant fighter. In 2 of his last 3 fights, they've been all striking title defenses and like fight of the year candidates. Is this a style that you think we're going to see more of Usman, or is it kind of just like matchup specific?
I think it depends on opponent. Yeah, I think it depends on opponent. I think the matchup matters. Listen, he can hype up. I'm a Usman fan. I'm friends with him. We get along great. It doesn't matter how much time Masvidal has to get ready for that fight, and it doesn't matter how much Usman wants to evolve in his striking. That's not a striking matchup that favors Usman, and that's totally a stylistic thing. Gilbert is very dangerous on the ground. A takedown doesn't necessarily mean you're in a safer spot than you were when you were standing on your 2 feet. So the takedown is just, I mean, we've gone over this 100 times. Masvidal, unless it's a title fight, Masvidal is going to avoid every wrestler he possibly can.
Sure. Because
those are matchups that he's always going to have problems with. So I don't see the Masvidal fight looking any different the second time around, no matter how much time either one of those guys have.
Yeah, I don't know how much public support there's going to be for that Masvidal rematch. And Usman's bank account would love a Masvidal pay-per-view.
And that's 100% where
there's
that
no doubt about that.
There's more competitive fights and tougher guys for Usman to fight. I don't think he's dodging tough fights. I think he's following dollar signs.
Mm-hmm.
And as the champion, you're a partner in those pay-per-view sales. You get a guy like Masvidal, it's like Diaz. He comes along with a lot of money, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily on the front end, but on the pay-per-view buys. There's guys that are going to buy that pay-per-view just to see Masvidal fight, and that's a incredible paycheck for Usman. And he's already had it once. He knows what that paycheck looks like. So you hype that up, you give Masvidal a built-in excuse, and you convince people that Masvidal can win that fight, and you're only going to build on the first one.
It's like a predator in the jungle. He got a little taste of that blood. He's like, all right. I want a little bit more. Go back to those zeros in my bank account.
I mean, that's the biggest paycheck he's ever had. You know,
Sure.
with those pay-per-view buys, and he did that on 6 days' notice. Mm-hmm. Imagine being able to build that for 7 or 8 weeks. That's a huge paycheck for him, and I get it. And I'm not going to knock him for that.
Oh yeah, I'll never knock a guy for chasing the dollar, but you know that's what we're doing here though is trying to find like a more realistic one that you think the fans in the UFC would get behind. Kind of a weird position that he's in right now. Leon Edwards, if he were, he was supposed to fight Khamzat Chimaev. That fight obviously fell through again for a third straight time. If Leon won that fight, number one contender would have made sense for him. Maybe they're talking about Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington. If Leon beats Colby, maybe that one makes sense. Kind of a weird position. There's no clear, Gilbert Burns was the clear number one contender. The next, I think, title defense for Usman isn't going to be that clear. I don't know who it's going to be.
Yeah, I don't know either. And now that I sit here and think about it, it's kind of crazy how Gilbert Burns made his way to the number one contender fight. I don't want to say he had an easy path, but it could have been much harder. He avoided your Masvidals. He avoided Leon Edwards. He avoided, he kind of avoided the really, really tough fights. He didn't fight Stephen Thompson. He kind of went Woodley Maya title fight, or maybe it was the other way around. He fight Maya Woodley.
Yeah,
is that how it went?
And the Woodley fight on paper at the time was a really tough matchup, but we just didn't get. Because he was fresh off of a title, losing his title. So he was one fight away from being champion, but it just didn't look like the Woodley that we've come to know. And I think that's what kind of made it a little bit more of a letdown as a contender fight. Yeah.
So as far as his next fight, you're right. There's not a clear number one contender. Leon Edwards I always feel like I'm shitting on him, and I don't mean to, but we haven't seen him in a while. So you got to keep reminding people of how great you are and why you deserve what you say you deserve. But I just, honestly, I mean, if we're just going strictly by schedule, it's probably Leon Edwards. He's beat the tougher guys. He's had, he's got the great win streak, but he just hasn't competed in a long time. So if we're talking about ring rust and kind of being inactive, that's a tough one. I heard Brett Okamoto and John Anik talk about possibly Stephen Thompson, but he's on a win streak, but he's kind of beating some up and comers and some guys that are coming on hot but are younger and not necessarily ranked super high. I mean, it's a perfect time for Usman to call out Masvidal, because if we're just chasing dollars, this is the best time to do it, because there's no one that's going to really stand there, put their hand up and say, I have the best case of it.
We would be remiss if we didn't discuss the co-main event briefly. Alexa Grasso put together her most complete performance, I would say, in the UFC, beating Macy Barber by unanimous decision. Grasso coming in to the UFC and for the bulk of her career in the UFC. There's boxer, slick boxer, good footwork, but that's all she is, a boxer. Just out jiu-jitsuing Barber at every possible turn. And just styling on her, striking as well with her old bread and butter. Watching her progress, because she was pushed, she was kind of like the Macy Barber before Macy Barber. Like, they were really wanting Alexa Grasso to be something special, and she hits a few road bumps. They really wanted Macy Barber to be something special. She's hit a couple road bumps, but we forget how young she was coming into the UFC and how green she was, and she's kind of like growing up. Like, I don't know what got better faster, her English or her jiu-jitsu.
Her English is really, really good. It happened fast.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to ask any of the analysts out there, myself included, if you're Macy Barber, how do you beat Alexa Grasso? You pressure her, you make it nasty, you get physical, you bully her, and don't let her stand on the outside and throw freely.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what Macy Barber did, and she got beat at her own game.
Yep.
Alexa Grasso was really tough in the clinch, which I was really impressed with. She was able to out wrestle her in a lot of those situations. She was able to get her down. She passed her guard. She was dominant on top of it. She was like you said, she was complete in this fight, and I think this was kind of her breakout moment. On the flip side of that, we do talk about ring rust, and is that a thing? And when you're as young as Macy Barber is, you have such a devastating injury that she had, was able to gut it out in that fight that she was injured in, and she, I think that she tried to take that momentum into her next fight, and maybe she just took too tough of a fight coming off of such a bad injury, and I don't know, she didn't look like she had her timing and her speed and like her presence. She didn't seem like she had that until the third round. Like I had the feeling watching that third round that I wish we had two more, because I felt like Macy finally got warmed up and finally got going. And it maybe shook some of those cobwebs and maybe got her feet back under her and really started to be comfortable in there after such a long time off. I did find myself wanting to see what two more rounds would look like.
Yeah, Macy Barber has this, she's still like raw in a lot of ways, but she has just kind of this confidence in her where she just thinks she's going to win every single round and win every single fight. And even though technically she's not quite there yet, there's a fearlessness in her that I think is going to serve her well as she continues. Also on this card, Kelvin Gastelum busted out the wrestling shoes and out-wrestled Ian Heinisch for 15 minutes. Ricky Simone got a unanimous decision against Brian Kelleher. That's a fight that got bumped up from the early prelims to the main card. This card got hit by a lot of injuries and a lot of, COVIDs and a lot of things that kind of tore it apart, but it ended really nicely. Anthony Hernandez getting a submission over a
yeah, holy shit, we got to talk about that.
I mean, that shit was
crazy.
No matter how good at jiu-jitsu you are, yeah, no matter how good at jiu-jitsu you are, when you're exhausted, that black belt gets white real quick.
Yeah, 100%. I had a friend text me yesterday, and he was, we're talking about what bets we're going to put in and who we're going to go big on. I'm telling you, he texted me and said, "What about this Hernandez Vieira fight?" And listen, I owe Anthony Hernandez a huge apology, because I said, "Listen, man, I think this was a short notice fight. I think the odds makers got this one right. I'm a jiu-jitsu guy. I came up with jiu-jitsu guy. I was big on him. I knew that I knew that his conditioning wasn't that good. I knew his striking wasn't that great. His fight IQ was low. But, as a black belt, I see this dude who's won Abu Dhabi like 7 times. I just don't see Hernandez winning this fight on short notice. And I just missed him. And as the fight is happening, he gets taken down in the first 10 seconds of the first round of the gap. See, I told you I was right. And I'm so impressed with that dude, just his composure, the way that he just stayed safe. He didn't stress out. He didn't freak out, worked his way back to his feet and just started banging those hands. The second he was on his feet, he was throwing punches. And that's how you beat a guy like that. You got to pressure him and make him tired and just hit him as much as you can, as many, as hard as you can, over and over and over, and get him to start stressing and start pushing his cardio. And I was just super impressed with that guy. And then when the fight's over, I look back at it like, of course that was going to happen. Like Vieira only has one way to win. And especially, at least over a guy that's I don't know, that's just tough. And a guy that's not going to fold when you put a little bit of pressure on him and get him in a bad spot. Like looking back, it almost made me rethink how I analyze some of these fights, because I didn't give him a chance at all. And then after I looked at it, like I missed a bunch of stuff that I shouldn't have. I don't know. I guess I shouldn't have shit on Hernandez as quickly as I did, just because of how much of how high level Vieira is on the ground.
Yeah, they call those performances pay-per-view pushers, because it's the last fight before the pay-per-view, and so everyone watches it and says like, "Oh, that was awesome! All right, let's buy the pay-per-view." They got what the UFC got what they asked for there. All right, well, this was awesome. Our first YouTube post-fight show. UFC 258, probably the first of many. We'll start doing this a little bit more often. Little talk. You've got some barley pops in you. I just got done working. We're both in a good mindset, bursting at the seams to talk about some fights. Let's do this more often.
Yeah, let's do it. And then I guess we're gonna do it again on Tuesday.
Do it Tuesday. I'll see you on Tuesday for SiriusXM MMA tonight. All right. Well, until then, I'm RJ Clifford. He's Anthony Lionheart Smith. Like, subscribe, and keep coming back because we got a lot more coming. See ya.